Welcome, everyone, to Canucks This Week. I'm Paul Chapman. This is Patrick Johnson. We are here to talk about the Canucks. We appreciate you watching, listening. You can go to theprovince.com, vancouversun.com, sign up for our Canuck Report newsletter. You will have all our Canuck content delivered to you every single day, several times a day, in fact, because you never know when news will break, Patrick. However, I knew with certainty in a week, on a day where we had absolutely no one working in sports, where we had contrived our fan council to provide us a weekend splash that featured heavily on what would you do with Quinn Hughes, that at 5 o'clock on a Friday, the Canucks would make the biggest trade in their history.
Yes.
So you, my friend, jumped in off vacation while in Mexico. Several Coronas deep, I would imagine, and did a fine job. You and Steve Ewan, who was also off last week, jumped in. Battleship, all hands, everyone working and getting the job done. So enough media whining. Let's talk about the deal. What are your overall impressions from day one?
Well, I think it's obviously very similar to what many have said, was that when you have to trade away your best player, it's hard to get a return that is going to fill in the gaps, and yet the Canucks did pretty good here, right? Like, we've seen Zeb William already, like the ability there, the ability to control play. He's a great defenseman. I was excited when I saw his name was involved. Is he Quinn Hughes level? No, but he's a guy that has a huge amount of talent, and he's only 20. That's fantastic. And I think we saw Liam Öhgren last night. He scored a goal. It was perhaps a bit fortunate with Jonathan Quick somehow losing the puck. But Öhgren was a guy that was in the mix with, in and around Jonathan Lekkerimäki. I talked to Cam Robinson yesterday, lead prospects Cam Robinson, who I, turn to from time to time for sort of thoughts on young players. And in 2022 at the draft, where the Canucks ended up with Lekkerimäki, he was really high on Öhgren. Like, he thought this is the guy to get. And he ended up going 19th overall to Minnesota. And, I joked about it even in the column, was like, it's kind of funny. You look at this this trade, and you've ended up with three guys, because, Marco Rossi's kind of in that range as well, although he's a bit older. You end up with guys that were very much Judd Brackett players. And of course, Judd Brackett was the former chief scout here in Vancouver, who's now the chief scout in Minnesota. And it fills in gaps they didn't have. I mean, it was great that the Abbotsford Canucks had an incredible run they did. And they've delivered a couple of guys to the NHL, but that's it. Like, there's not a lot else in the minors there. So they were, you always need more defensemen. So they found not a replacement, but a guy that will take up a fair bit of the Quinn Hughes role. They needed more wingers who can play, perhaps with a bit of pace, a bit of physicality, a bit of offensive punch. And I think, that realistically Öhgren is a sort of a third line winger. Those are guys you need. And Marco Rossi clearly is a second line center, which is something they've been looking for. So they've certainly added to the pile. This is not like the Lucas Reichel trade, for instance, where they were trying to find a guy and maybe it would work out, and Reichel obviously didn't. All three of these guys are guys that should be players for this team. And that's good. Overall, it's a bit of a, you're losing the best player, you're losing a Norris Trophy winner, the best defenseman in team history. And that's the reality. And as I wrote, him leaving is ultimately a failure on the entire organization, because they shouldn't have had to make this trade. This is a player that looked around and saw what he saw and said, I don't want to stay. Just like Rick Tocchet left. Rick Tocchet leaving was a failure on the organization. In many ways, just like the decision to go with JT Miller and over Bo Horvat, and then losing out on JT Miller. Like, this is the ultimate in a series of organizational failures. But if you go with what Jim Rutherford told me, and I wrote about this yesterday on Tuesday, there is a recognition that they must sort the future out, because if they don't, I mean, we know the alternative. We've seen how bad the hockey's been this year, and there was no hope, and everyone wants to see some hope, and now there is hope, but it's now about how much more can they add to that.
I think that's the key point is they were the worst team in the NHL with Quinn Hughes. So, I mean, you want to hang on to your best player,
Right.
but the return's pretty good. I mean, rather than have to wait for 4 first-round draft picks, maybe, you've got your own, so it's like 4 years in a row, you
Right.
have to double up. They've got 3 guys who have already been picked, ready to go, and a future. So, um, I find the notion that we're so tied to cliches in sports and exceptionally so in hockey, where it's like, oh, whoever gets the best player wins the trade. I'm not sure that's true here because the team needed to course correct it, and you can understand in a way why they ended up where they are because, first round pick for JT Miller, you get an extra pick.
Right.
When they've been wheeling and dealing and you were like, oh, our defense is terrible, so we want to bring in Marcus Pettersson or Philip
Yes.
Roenick. Like, you haven't stockpiled picks, which is maybe counter to the fans because you felt like you needed to appease Hughes. You felt like your future
Right.
was a bit more
Right.
now. As you had written, actually from Mexico, how it's a death knell for this core. We love the word core in hockey. We had,
Yeah.
the core with the Sedins and the various iterations is like, wow, Bieksa and Burrows, this core is done. Well, this it truly was. This was, Miller, Horvat, Demko, Besser, Hughes, Pettersson. Like that was it. We've seen this now. We've still got Pettersson. Yes, Besser and Demko are still there, maybe diminished. But this to me is the new core. This is Coates. This is Vilander. This is these
Yeah.
3 guys plus
Yeah.
whatever they get this summer. Um,
Yeah.
and hockey insiders seem to think the Canucks did really well here. So, how rosy is the future, and how long do you think fans have to wait for that?
I think the future. I mean, I wouldn't say it's rosy yet, but there's a chance for it to be for sure. I mean, Elias Pettersson's still number one center on this team. Do you believe in him being number one center on this team? Probably goes to some of that answer. And if you think he is, and him and Marco Rossi, like those two are going to be pretty good 1-2. It's obviously a different dynamic than you would have had if it was Pettersson and Miller or Pettersson and Horvat. But it's still pretty good. And the sort of the horse that Pettersson is proving to be, even though he's currently injured. I mean that from a playing perspective is outstanding. Um, I think they do still need, obviously they need more stuff, more guys. Like that's just the thing. This is the we need an army thing. The Botch's old we need an army thing, which I wrote about as the sort of premise for my conversation with Rutherford. Like that you can't just sort of hope that a handful of guys are going to make it. You need more than you think. And Rutherford totally agreed with me. He goes, yeah, not every prospect. I mean, he didn't say this, but the truth is not every prospect's going to make it. If you go from the perspective of all prospects are bad, which means that you should be happy when one makes it, and you shouldn't count on anyone really other than if you're picking in the top 3. And you got to believe now the Canucks want to pick in the top 3. They recognize where they're at. They can't say that, but that they're openly recognizing that this team cannot win too many games, right? Like that's what happened with Boudreau. That's what happened with Tocchet in 22 and 23. Like both those drafts, they've ended up with decent players, but it would have been nice to draft in the top 10, right? And that they didn't draft in the top 10 because they ended up with these playoff chases and because they didn't cut stuff loose. So, that is now the task. If they do get a decent return for Kiefer Sherwood, if they do find a new home for, say, Teddy Bluger, even David Kampf, who's also a free agent this summer and is playing pretty well, but realistically is not a long-term fit here. If they find a way to turn those guys into just more picks, and you can start adding in younger players or players that are closer to being the NHL, there is a way to get this done in a year or two. I mean, I was looking at back in an old Botch column from 2018 where he just pointed out that it took all of 18 months or 15 months Yeah, here's the lead. It was February 16th, 2018. Canucks would be wise to set Bruins' facelift model. And his lead is 15 months after losing the Stanley Cup final, the Boston Bruins traded one of their core defensemen for picks. No one knew it at the time, but moving Johnny Boychuk was the first play in a string of vets for draft pick deals that helped propel the Bruins back to the top of the NHL. There was much praise heaped on the Trevor Linden era Canucks this week for apparent draft success in a prospect pool that some have labeled, quote, unprecedented, but it may yet be that. Right? And let's remember, that's February 2018, right? Which is Travis Green's first season in charge, a sort of a bright new hope. They still didn't make the playoffs the next year. Didn't make the playoffs, right? Like that, it took them a whole other year to make the playoffs, and that was in COVID, and that was with those guys that Benning did assemble, but that was the best that group ever did, and it meant there is clearly the point has been made that that group got too high on itself out of that run and never really replicated that again until 2024 when the Alvin Rutherford built team was really exciting to watch, right? And that's the thing. How do you get to that point, and then how do you get beyond that, right? And I mean, we were talking with our fan council about this the other day, but I think in 2021 I wrote a thing about the Avalanche. How do the Canucks become the Avalanche, right? And if you look back, the Avalanche, it must be remembered, shifted gears, right? Like they moved on from Ryan O'Reilly and Matt Duchene, right? They Nathan McKinnon became the guy they built the team around, right? So I'm not convinced there's parallels at all right now. They've moved off Quinn Hughes and JT Miller and Bo Horvat for basically self-imposed decisions, not because they're saying this isn't working on the player side, because things were not working on the team side, right? Like the team made the decisions. It's the team that's to blame for those choices. There's no sort of big picture decision other than, I suppose, the Horvat. But even if you look at Hughes, in the end, and as Rutherford admitted himself, he was anxious about what was going to happen here because they were ceding control of the situation, right? The preferred situation was that they kept Quinn Hughes. Quinn Hughes continued to lead them into this great new era, and they built a team around him. They're not doing that anymore, and that is the truth in all this. And if you're looking for a way to sell hope is important, and there's a beginning here. But as I've said, if this is really going to be the beginning of something, it truly has to be the beginning of something. You have to see more things happen.
Well, when you're the worst team in the NHL, absolutely. I mean, you can't keep going down that path, and that's where I think we've been talking about this all year on these videos. You've been writing about it. This quest for a center when there just aren't any available. So are you going to give up Vilander or Coates or next year's first to get an aging center to hope to get Quinn to stay? Yeah. That's the path they had been going down through this whole, like this desperate hope to avoid a rebuild. Yeah. And now it seemed that when they couldn't make that deal, because it seemed like that they were trying, everyone's been talking since the start of the season, oh, they're shopping for a center, oh, they're shopping for a center. And when there really wasn't one available, they've now gone in another direction. So let me ask you, you've talked about some of those names there, obviously Sherwood, Kampf, Kane, Luger. I know Garland's name has been out there as well. It was funny to see Boudreau talking about, hey, Thatcher Demko, if he can stay healthy, would be great for a team in a playoff run. I don't know about any of that, but how many do you think this is going to be a clearance sale? Do you think they're going to get out? And what do you think is the best return? Like, if you're dealing Sherwood, and the ask reportedly was a first-round pick, you're dealing him to a contender probably. Yes. So it's a late first-round pick. But what do you think are they looking for more picks, or is it more, okay, a guy who was a first or second-round pick who's done it okay, who's more of a prospect?
Well, as I was talking with Rutherford, I found myself thinking a lot. I mean, I referenced it in the column I wrote. But I found myself thinking a lot of sort of what happened with Mike Gillis and what happened with Trevor Linden and why they essentially were dismissed, whereas Rutherford clearly is not. It doesn't seem like he's on the verge of being dismissed. I had myself wondering a few weeks ago, maybe that might be happening. I wondered even that they're going to be allowed to make the trade. But it is clear to me right now that Rutherford certainly has his hands firmly on the wheel. And, that obviously we've talked about this elsewhere, and I'm sure we'll talk about it again. That also leaves you wondering about Patrick Alvin's role in all this. But for the moment.
Just let me interject on that because I was going to bring it up. There was this quote in a Greg Wyshynski ESPN piece that looked of the impact, the ripple effect of the
Yes.
Hughes trade throughout the NHL, and it was sort of this throwaway line buried in there where he has a quote from Rutherford saying, Patrick had a lot on his plate, so
To be clear, Patrick Alvin, I mean, I had a lot on
yeah,
my
yeah.
plate and then I was
Well,
on
of course you did.
vacation, but
Yes.
yeah,
Patrick Alvin had a lot of, Jim
yeah,
Rutherford wasn't talking to ESPN about you, Patrick. I
no,
know, well, maybe he was, it just didn't make the cut. But yeah, the idea is that Alvin had so much going on that
yeah.
Rutherford stepped in to make the biggest trade in team history in many respects.
Do you
How,
think, by the way, just on that, before we go, I do have I have a bit of on that, but just before we go on, do you think this is bigger than the Pavel Bure trade?
um, I do only because I think Hughes. I know this debate goes on and on. I think Bure is the best player in team history. It's probably an age thing. I saw him
Yeah,
growing up. The
sure.
Canucks were so terrible. He was the first real, true,
Yeah,
dominant skill player they had.
it's wild.
But
People forget like how dominant he was. Like,
yeah, yeah.
anyway,
And
sorry, go
but
on.
I just think that era was coming to an end, and Pavel desperately wanted out, and it's never truly been fully explained as to why. We've had answers. It was this whole debate about like whether his jersey should be retired. Some fans have never forgiven him for wanting out of Vancouver. But I think for Hughes, his age, his ascendancy, where he is, and where the team was. I mean, I look at Jovanovski was very good
Yes,
for the Canucks, but
yeah,
that was a case where you gave up a player and got volume back, and the
yeah,
volume didn't work.
yeah,
In this
yeah.
case, I think the Canucks were so bereft of talent elsewhere that this, to me, like, is it a bigger trade? I don't know. I mean, there's an argument to be made that the Trevor Linden trade was the biggest because
It
that
was the most
spun.
impactful. Yeah,
Well, it spun into Bertuzzi and McCabe, and
and
McCabe
the
was spun
Sedins.
into the
Yeah,
Sedins.
yeah,
So I think there's a handful of ones to choose from, but like in terms of where the team is, the asset moved and what you got back, that's where
right,
I sort of term it as that. But
right,
it
right.
depends how you look at it.
Anyway, it's a
I
side
think it's a
note.
great debate and stuff to
Yeah,
write
it's a side
about.
note, and there's the context matters. And I think if you sit back and look at it, like in terms of the potential of this trade versus the Bure trade, like you're absolutely right. Like Ed Jovanovski was a fantastic player and an important acquisition. Like that was the key in that trade, right? But if you look at it, they also moved a pretty good, Brian Burke moved a pretty good defenseman in Brett Hedican, right? He moved a defense prospect in Brad Ferentz, who, played in the NHL, never blew anyone's socks off, but was in an era where the Canucks actually seemed good at pulling out defensemen kind of out of nowhere and producing some defensemen. Other than that, the Canucks did not get a lot back, right? Like they got sort of the corpse of Dave Gagne, who ended up sort of working for the organization for a little bit. Ed Jovanovski, Kenman Weeks, of course, his story has been told upside down, sideways, and backwards, and a tough guy named Mike Brown, who didn't amount to anything and could, anyway. I don't think he's on. He occasionally would appear on Sportsnet 650 in recent years. I
Yeah.
think he lives here, but anyway. To go to the Alvin question and then to go all the way back to what I was going to say about sort of the Gillis and Linden experiences. Yeah, I mean, Alvin, in many ways, I think, at the very least, is a bit of a case of a guy who seemed like he had a plan. Things were going together. Obviously, he essentially built that 2024 playoff team. All those decisions that were made there. I mean, I think what was the stat last night? There's 6 guys left on the Canucks from that 2024 playoff roster, which is
Stunning.
absolutely wild. So there, there's certainly elements. Rutherford came in and for the most part has stuck to his concept, which is that he was going to kind of be this sort of, grandfatherly figure in the organization, bringing up a new group of front office people. So Alvin and Cammy Granato and Emily Castonguay and Ryan Johnson, and help them sort of mold them into future long-term NHL executives. And in this sort of collective operation, very very much in line with, if people saw the Gillis proposal when he was talking, I think it was to Pittsburgh, sort of how he'd organize things, and this sort of kind of idea that there's sort of a senior leader, but it's a group that's operating in their own little areas of expertise, and they come together to make decisions, and there's a sort of a collaborative concept in how they do it, and that certainly has been how the process has been portrayed here. It really goes back, if you go back to that end of season press conference last spring when Rutherford announced we need to get a second line center and there's a lot of stuff that hasn't worked and that's on us. There's a real sense of Rutherford putting his hands back on the wheel, and that Alvin has been somewhat sidelined. Now his name is still in all the announcements, and obviously he held a press conference to talk about the trade. But it has become clear that he was not the leading voice on this trade. And to be clear, that quote from Rutherford was to a small sort of side group of reporters made on Friday night after the Alvin press conference.
Yeah.
Which I was actually invited to, but I was on holiday and couldn't make it work. I was able to write, but I wasn't really able to sit in on that. And that's partly why I followed Rutherford. But he said, yeah, like Patrick was busy with what? Like
exactly.
So
putting up Christmas
has
lights.
His role changed? I mean, it seems possible. Certainly, he's that Rutherford. Like I said, this is a more of Rutherford clearly wanting to have his hands on the wheel. I mean, when he first showed up, he was a guy. There wasn't a lot in his front office. He knew he had to staff up quick, so they made a bunch of hires, some better than others, and. As things have evolved over the last couple seasons or the seasons after that, it became more and more of the Alvin show. Although Alvin has never been as comfortable with the media as Rutherford always has, and there was a period there where Rutherford really stepped back, especially I think that fall of 2022, and he did not. He made his voice. He reduced his voice in public, right? Like you did not hear from him very much, and then. Beginning with that 23-24 season, we when he said everything has to go right for us to make the playoffs, and that's absolutely what happened. We started hearing from him more, but yet nonetheless, it was Alvin working on the roster, and it was Rutherford that was kind of the guiding hand. And certainly, our outside perception is that has shifted. So, I went and looked. Alvin signed a 3-year contract extension in January of 2024. So that's almost 2 years ago. So he's either halfway through the second year of that contract, or he's about to enter the final year of that contract. Either way, he has one more year. Certainly seems to have one more season on him, right? So there is sort of a way to imagine it too, that like he doesn't have a whole ton of job security anymore. I mean, you sort of say, that 1 year is always that kind of buffer for everybody in the NHL. It's other than Tocchet leaving, like that was the thing that was so unusual at Tocchet leaving, was that he went all the way to the end of his contract, right? And he decided to leave. He could have re-signed and he didn't. And rarely do hockey people do that, because you kind of look for that extra year of security. So it clearly is that Rutherford is much more on the scene here, right? Like he is much more focused on his legacy, on building. I mean, listen, if this works, that's to everyone's benefit, right? Like that means the Canucks win, and that means fans are cheering for something, right? So this is, to me, more than anything, it is exactly what it sounds like, which is that Rutherford is trying to take charge of things here.
Let me lead you into your Linden and Gillis point, in that we reached that position where, after a very strong, very smart GM who certainly had license to do things his way, lost the trust of ownership.
Yes.
And the direction to go with Benning, where I think they recognized his foibles, and you talk about Alvin, not good with media, maybe a little rough around the edges, but hey, he's a great scout. So let's bring Trevor Linden in as sort of this buffer between the GM and ownership, but also, can be the public face, can be the guy at the Board of Trade luncheons, while maybe being an advisor on hockey terms. And that model clearly didn't work. And so then you can look at how much Weisbrod was involved with Benning. But it was a bit of a mishmash, right? So now that you're in this situation, is it more that, as you wrote in your other piece that was excellent, there's been this idea that the family does not want to rebuild because they don't want empty seats. They want playoff revenue. So they're not prepared to burn it down to the ground for 2 years. But now I look at it like, is it Jim that has the trust of Francesco Aquilini, and maybe that's a bridge too far for Alvin, and that's the
Well,
structure? Because the president should be more of a figurehead and not the
yes,
general manager, but it
right.
seems like they keep getting it backwards. The president is the guy who's undermining the GM, and it's like organizationally structure matters. It matters in
Yeah,
every sport. You look at teams that
yeah,
succeed. The teams that win championships have a strong owner who's willing to support the people they hire in their
yeah,
decisions, and they have a philosophy on down. When you start muddling that and you don't have people in defined roles and you don't have people on the same page and you have
right.
people getting involved in other people's jobs, it never works.
Yeah, and I think exactly so. Like you need to stick to the structure, and I think we feel that certainly is the sense of that there's a shift here, and it, part of me found myself wondering too, or thinking that as much as there's about Rutherford kind of getting his hands back on the team wheel, there's also Rutherford getting his wheel with ownership, right?
Yeah.
Like he's talked again and again about. Or I mean, right off the start, I literally said it. Like, how do you deal with ownership? And he said part of this job is managing, is managing up and managing expectation and managing reality. And that's why I asked him. I said, how did you convince him to sort of support whether it's rebuild or not, this direction that is not going to prioritize the playoffs? And part of his part of his commentary to me, and I didn't really read in the story, but it was sort of saying, well, what are you trying to do here? There was an element of what are we trying to do here? Like making the playoffs simply as a destination isn't enough, and also having that in mind isn't actually any kind of future. Like you are trying to build a cup winning team.
Are
That
you
is
though? Like you have an ownership group that is one member of the family is out. You haven't replaced them.
right.
If you go by simple math, that would be a $400 million buyout. So is the goal now to retain control? Is the goal now to win a cup? Is the
I
goal
mean,
to make money? Like
I think that's a wholly separate question. I get why you're saying that, but I think fundamentally, if you're Jim Rutherford, what's your job? And
for Jim,
right,
yes, for sure.
that's what I mean, right? Like, so for him, he is saying, this is the guy that pays the bills. I have a relationship with him, obviously, and I need to deliver on that. And my task is to try to create a cup contending team, right? Like that is the task at hand. And the idea of just sort of stumbling around trying to make the playoffs. I mean, he has said win and you're get in, win and you're in, and anything's possible. Like that is fundamentally a philosophy that's there, and so that is something I think you should still be anxious about. He didn't say that to me the other day, but because fundamentally the belief is build a team that's good enough to not just make the playoffs but to contend. Right? Don't just stumble around and be the 16th place team. You want to be a top 5 team. And this brings us to the Gillis point. So, which was that, and I've written about this a couple times in the last year. The one that I wrote about last month caught people's attention in a way that when I first mentioned it last spring, it didn't. But there was this plan on the table that Gillis was going to trade Ryan Kessler, which I think everyone knew, and get a couple first-round picks out of Anaheim, and trade Alex Burrows to Philadelphia and get another first-round pick. So they would have had 4 first-round picks in the 2014 draft, right? And so this is where the kind of idea of the full-on tear it down to the studs rebuild, this is where you can make the argument that this isn't a necessary thing that always has to happen. That if you get it right, if you juice your top-end efforts in the draft, there is this concept that you will create a sort of not necessarily a new core, but a cohort of young, exciting first-round quality players, right? So, and that is what Rutherford was referring to, and he says we have to get this draft right. I mean, I took that to being that they would love to get another first-round pick. So if they have 3 first-rounders this year, and this is the funny thing, if you go think a little bit more about that botch column from 2018, which I'm going to riff off of a little bit, I think, is that in that moment, Boston, everyone knew Boston to screw up. Like they missed out on Matt Barzal, right? Like there was they had that, was it 14, 15, 16 or 13, 14, 15? Anyway. And they misfired on it. They fundamentally got that part wrong. Boston would be an incredible hockey team right now if they hadn't missed that. And so that's kind of the point. And that's, I think, where I'm going to bridge out of is that, you need, it's not only that you need as many lottery tickets as you can get, but you also have to recognize the various value. I mean, this is an NFL thing, right? Like pick value is everything.
Yeah.
And in hockey, pick value is I think it's better understood than it was, but it's not as it truthfully is not as fruitful as the NFL draft, right? You can get partly because you need so many guys to fill an NFL roster.
It's also
but partly,
partly age too, though, Patrick.
Partly it's age, and partly it's also because there are so many college football players.
Yeah,
right.
But drafting 21-year-olds and 22-year-olds versus 18-year-olds is a massive difference.
And it's the primary player acquisition mode. And this was something that it was interesting to me, people reacting to what Rutherford was saying. Rutherford said something really interesting to me, which was basically saying free agency is done. Like, there's nothing there. Most guys are re-signing with their team. The only way to get players now is through trades, which they've just gone and done, and through the draft.
Yeah.
And if you really hit your marks at the top end of the draft, and this is something that I know, I talk to people around the league, and this is, more and more, there is a feeling that, yes, okay, you can pick guys later in the draft, and yes, okay, sometimes you find them, but more and more, the best players, the players that stick, are picked in the first 2, even 3 rounds.
Yeah.
And that the teams have simply become better at drafting. Now, whether they're drafting the right guys for their team is a different question, but the general concept is that finding players that are going to have NHL careers of some type is become more and more of a sort of a certain thing when you pick a player in the first 2 rounds.
Yeah, so, I mean, the NFL is experiencing this because as the cap goes up, teams have this extra cash to re-sign their best players. If you get into cap trouble is the only way that's going to happen. But because of the scarcity of good players coming up, if a team has cap trouble and has too many guys to sign, then you're going to have a bidding war, which you end up with where the Canucks have been. Like, we want the biggest free agent, and we'll spend whatever we have because we're drunk with cash.
Yeah, exactly.
When you're adding Amazon to your broadcast contracts and it's giving you all this money, that's how good players stay with their team. So you're right. I mean, this... Yeah. It's trades and drafts. So
and that was sort of anyway. So the point is that that in 2014, clearly ownership did not agree with Gillis's assessment, which was that we need to start thinking about the future. That this run of playoffs has been great, but it's going to have to end for a year or two. And they didn't accept that assessment. And even in 2018, when Trevor Linden left, right, he had come to a similar conclusion, which was that we need more guys, and it's not going to happen overnight. And that was again the task was and then they didn't make the playoff, right? Like they didn't make the playoffs for 2 more years.
They're stuck in inertia for
really
5 years.
They didn't make it until they didn't make the second round. They didn't make the playoffs again until 6 years after Trevor Linden left, right? Yeah. There was a column at some point to be written. Trevor Linden was right. This is going to take a couple more years. Like this is not an immediate thing. And like Gillis was right too. Like these guys, they looked at what was going in front of them, whereas there was this desire from ownership to live in the moment, to see what could happen. If you roll the dice, maybe it works out. And as our friend Ray Ferraro always said, hope is not a plan, and that's
absolutely
all they have going for.
Yeah. Or everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face, right? So that was.
But I mean, that's Von Moltke, the elder, with just your battle plan fails the instant you enter into battle. Anyway.
Yep. We've gone long, so we'll do extra videos that talk about this. But I wanted you to talk about who maybe are the top 2 candidates to get traded next, and when would you think that would happen? Do you think this is done now until after Christmas and the New Year, or do you think we could see another move? Let's say this Friday at 5:00 or Christmas Eve at 6:00, because that's the way this team does things.
I think Kiefer Sherwood remains, I think, the most interesting player they have here. We're running into the Christmas trade deadline, right? Next week. 2 weeks from now. No, it is next week.
Yeah, it is next
Christmas
week.
Next week.
Yeah, no, the roster freeze. Yeah.
I have a hard time imagining it happening in this window. I would not be surprised if something happens in January, and I think there's all that the Olympic break in February perhaps is also a bit of a stand-in deadline as well.
That's when Linden was traded before that.
Exactly, right. And it's not unprecedented. I mean, Bo Horvat as well, right? Like, it's not unprecedented. So I think, yeah, I think Sherwood. It's tough to say who else. I mean, they've said it'll be one of their, that they've got these unrestricted free agents, so which includes Bluger, Forboard, who are both still hurt, and who else am I drawing a blank?
Well, Kane.
Kane, Evander Kane. I think. Listen, Evander Kane has not scored enough, but I thought he was pretty good last night. I think he's played his role well enough. Um, I think the closer we get to the deadline, where you can basically eat half his contract, and another team might come along and say, "Yeah, we'd love to have him as our third or fourth line guy." I think there's enough there that a team will trade for him, but it'll be short term kind of thing, and we'll see. I mean, I don't know what holds for his future, anything beyond that. Um, but right now he is a player on the team. But I had someone say to me, they've got to get out. They've got to. He is not a listen. We know he is a abrasive, loud personality. He is certainly not a player who's going to be here for the future. And I had someone say, listen, I think in the end, if you're trying to truly build out a culture, as Rutherford says, keeping Kane around doesn't make sense. So. I wouldn't. I would imagine he's a guy they would like to move on, and we'll see how that shakes out.
Excellent. Great stuff, Patrick. Lots of good stuff to chew on here. And we do have lots of other things to talk about.
Always.
The Canucks are all of a sudden interesting again. So thanks to everyone for watching, listening. Wish you Merry Christmas and good holidays. If you have, unless you're like Patrick, who didn't realize that 1 week today is Christmas Eve.
Yes.
But lots for us to cover here, and we'll keep the content coming. Go to province.com, sign up for Canucks Report, and you will get all of our content delivered to you daily. So happy holidays, everyone. We'll talk to you next week.